Okay, so why is it that the youth are in favor of socialism? And by socialism, I don't mean social democracy like Bernie Sanders or Norway. That's just capitalism with taxes and social programs like universal health care and tax-funded colleges. No, by socialism, I mean the workers owning and controlling the means of production democratically. So, is it media brainwashing? Well, if you watch the quote-unquote left-wing news of this country, you won't really see them talking about the problems of blue-collar labor, because CNN and MSNBC are owned by Time Warner and GE and other companies like that. So obviously they're not going to talk about the plight of labor in this country because they're owned by anti-union corporations. So it can't be brainwashing by the media. All they do is complain about Donald Trump and then talk about some celebrity scandal. Ooh. No, that's not. So it can't be because of media brainwashing. What about colleges? Well, some colleges do teach, Marxism, but they should, because whether we like it or not, Marxism is a big part of the history of the world, particularly in the last century. But if anybody has ever even watched an introductory course of economics on, say, YouTube, where they put a camera in the room while a professor is lecturing, they'll see more or less that economics is a right-wing study. It doesn't teach the labor theory of economic value. It teaches the utility theory of economic value, where something's utility is what determines its value, not the labor that goes into it. That's what's being taught in the economics courses of American universities, not Marxism. So it can't be brainwashing by the American universities. So what is it? One reason, I think, is because social democracy and socialism are often used to, the word socialism is often used to describe social democracy. Bernie Sanders has been doing this since the 80s. He pointed to some provinces in Canada and said they're democratic socialists because they have universal health care. So that's one reason. But there are also a lot of kids that support Marxism too. A lot of people in their youth that support Marxism. And why is that? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for this too. One, the economy doesn't work for the youth the way it did in the 1970s, right? We don't have strong labor unions anymore, and the prices of housing is much higher in comparison with wages than what they were in the 1970s. And unless you want to go into a bunch of debt by going into college, the only job you're really going to get is a shitty factory job or Walmart, which pay about the same. So, because of that, I think the youth are in favor of a system that entitles you to a job and entitles you to housing. Right? Even in the Soviet Union, you were entitled to a job and to at least an apartment. Even though you had to wait 20 years for a free one from the government, you were still entitled to it. So that's one reason. Another reason is the youth are rebellious. Right? Private property is one of the founding values that built this country, along with some other ones. And what better way to rebel than to support a system that is completely antithetical to the values that built the country that these people were born in? So rebellion, I think, is a reason. Being idealistic is another, right? Socialism is supposed to be a system that leads to communism. And what is communism? A post-scarcity society where money is no longer needed because, there's no scarcity of the goods, so demand doesn't need to be controlled. And where there's no government, there's no borders, everything is free. Everybody freely volunteers their time for the betterment of the community. It's basically a post-scarcity socialist anarchy society without borders. That's more or less what communism is. And that is pretty much the definition of idealism. That's a perfect society where nobody has political or economic authority over another person. You can't get more idealistic than that. And the youth are very much idealistic. They want things to be as close to perfect as possible with regards to how things work. And yeah, so that's another reason. And the youth like things that are different from what the status quo is. Right? It is always the youth that changes culture. Right? It always has been. The old people are the ones that sit back complaining that culture is being changed. Just look at the old people now complaining about it. Right? But it's always the youth that cause the culture to change because they don't like the way things are. They want things to be better. That's why in 50 years, with the exception of maybe some isolated idiots in rural areas, LGBTQ folks will be accepted completely. Trans people, gay people, all of these people. Because the culture is going to be changed by the youth, while the old people sit back and just complain about it. Right? And that leads me to the point of why the youth also like socialism. Socialism is very much different from what they're used to. It's very much different from the status quo of this country. So, these are the reasons the youth support socialism, right? The economy is shit, right? The middle class is disappearing downwards, and the youth are caught up in that, so they don't like it. The youth are rebellious, and what better way to rebel than to adopt a system that is antithetical to the values of the country they were born in. The youth are idealistic, in that these ideals are pretty much the definition of idealism, where everything is perfect. And the youth like things that are different, which I guess could also be counted as the youth being rebellious. Right? So I think these are the reasons why the youth support socialism. It's not brainwashing, it's just the nature of the youth. It's why usually these people that support socialism, once they get to the age of, 30, they usually kind of don't really support it anymore. There are some old people that still support socialism. Look at Noam Chomsky for an example. But most of them grow out of it. And so those are my thoughts on why the youth support socialism over capitalism. So peace.